In today's video, we're going to continue our 2019 off-season plan series. Today, we're taking a look at the Chicago Blackhawks, and that's coming up next. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. If you're new to the channel, thanks for stopping by. We review and discuss all 31 NHL teams, so if you're a huge hockey fan, consider subscribing and clicking the bell so you don't miss anything. So as I mentioned, today is going to be video number 4 in a series of 31 where we're covering all 31 NHL teams, covering their 2019 off-season plan. So how these videos works, we're going to break them into a few different segments here. Segment 1, we're going to take a look at the season that just was. We're going to review the team and individual stats, take a look at some areas of strength and weakness. Secondly, we're going to take a look at the contract situation as well as our cap space heading into next year. So any potential RFAs, potential UFAs, what they have for cap space to work with over the summer. Thirdly, we're going to take a look at what areas they need to address going into the offseason and if there's any prospects in the system who can fill those holes, or do they need to look outside the organization for some help. Now let's get started here by taking a look at the 2018-19 season for the Chicago Blackhawks. As you can see, the Chicago Blackhawks finished with a record of 36-34-12 for 84 points, 6th place in the Central Division. Now, of course, that was a very tightly contested division this year. There were points in the season where it did look like they would have a shot at a playoff spot. They certainly did surge in the second half at times, but unfortunately they just got too far behind early on and just could not catch up. Now, taking a look at some of their team statistics here, taking a look at special teams first, their power play was actually pretty good. For a team who didn't make the playoffs, they did take advantage of their power play quite often, clicking at 20.2% for the 15th best in the NHL. So pretty much middle of the pack. They certainly had no trouble scoring goals. It was just the opposite here. Keeping the puck out of the net was their big problem this year. The PK certainly shows that. They were dead last in the NHL, number 31, 72.7% on the PK. So that's certainly a main area they need to look at for next year to improve for sure. Now, in goals for, as I mentioned, they scored 270 goals for 8th best. They had no trouble scoring. They had many players accomplish career highs and put the puck in the net plenty. That is not an area of weakness for this team. But goals against, as I mentioned, like the penalty kill, struggled big time. 292 goals against for 30th place. So obviously team defense overall and goaltending certainly an area of struggle. Now let's take a look here at some of their goaltending statistics from their 2 goaltenders who played the bulk of the year. Obviously they didn't really have a clear-cut starting goalie all year due to the fact that Corey Crawford was injured again for significant periods of time. And we'll take a look at some of their top individual scorers as well. So with respect to goaltending, Corey Crawford did not appear nearly as often as they were hoping in the 18-19 season. He succumbed to more injuries, especially in the concussion front, which is not good. There certainly were times where many wondered if his career was over, and he continues to come back. You can't help but wonder where things are at with him and really long term if he should even continue playing. But needless to say, when he did play, it wasn't too bad, but you can certainly understand due to long layoffs, there was certainly some rust, and at the same time, the team in front of him defensively was not great. So he finished with a record of 14-18-5, a goals against average of 2.93, and a save percentage of .908. So obviously it wasn't too bad, but like I said, that defense in front of him was a big-time area of weakness this year, so it wasn't getting a lot of help. Cam Ward, the other guy who played, pretty much half the year with Crawford, of course, Colin Delia certainly played his role in there as well, but these two guys played the most. Cam Ward had a record of 16-12-4 with a goals against average of 3.67 and an .897 save percentage. So Cam Ward really did not have a great season after being signed to a one-year deal by the Hawks to be, assuming to be their backup goaltender. Really didn't come through with a lot of big-time performances. As I will say, for him, like I did with Crawford, the team defense in front of him was not great, but still, they couldn't get a lot of timely saves out of Ward when they really needed it either. So overall, it just was a project that did not work out much for either side there. Now let's take a look at some of the individual top scorers for the team. Certainly saw many great performances, including Patrick Kane leading the way with 44 goals and 110 points. Jonathan Toews, 35 goals and 81 points. I know coming into the last couple of seasons, there was a lot of talk about Kane and Toews, whether or not they certainly started to decline in their play. Well, I think it's safe to say that they proved everybody wrong here yet again. Putting up career highs at their age was unbelievable. Those two guys were very, very much a big part of the offense here, and certainly was a reason they stood a chance to win just about any night that they did win. Obviously, Alex DeBrincat had another phenomenal year, scoring 41 goals, putting up 76 points, so he's certainly scoring at a great rate. His buddy Dylan Strome, who was acquired during the season, came over and put up 51 points in 58 games. That was a terrific acquisition. Strome really started to thrive for the first time in his NHL career. And of course, on the back end, Erik Gustafsson certainly had a surprise breakout season, 17 goals and 43 assists for 60 points, bringing up the offense from the back end, which was a nice surprise for them. That's something that they greatly needed, something that they hadn't been getting as much, so it was nice to see him really break through on that front. The season here in Chicago, they certainly saw a lot of changes, and nothing bigger than early in the year when they decided to part ways with longtime coach Joel Quenneville. Obviously, Quenneville is one of the greatest coaches of all time. It's also been noted and discussed that maybe Stan Bowman and Joel Quenneville didn't have the greatest working relationship in the past couple of years, and certainly had a difference of philosophy in a few areas, and that also might have played a role as well. Of course, Quenneville was replaced with youngster Jeremy Colleton, who doesn't have a lot of experience, but as the year went on and he got his systems in place and made some changes, the team did look a lot better and responded well to his coaching. So overall, that move so far looks all right. Of course, there's also been a number of trades throughout the year, and I must give General Manager Stan Bowman some credit. I know leading into the year, if you look back at any of our last season off-season plan videos or the season previews coming into the year, I know I did give him a lot of flack for a lot of the contracts he had signed, a lot of the deals he had made previously. I thought Bowman was more of the problem than Quenneville, but really at this point I think he's kind of redeemed himself relatively well and certainly put himself on good ground here to remain in that general manager job for a period of time. He made some good trades this year. Let's take a look at some of the top deals that Bowman made this year. Of course, some of these trades seemed fairly minor and somewhat insignificant at the time, but they've kind of proved relatively well. He was able to acquire Drake Caggiula from the Oilers in exchange for Brandon Manning. I think it's fair to say that they easily won that trade. Manning didn't even finish the year in the NHL, and Caggiula certainly can provide some depth scoring for the Hawks. Of course, the biggest trade of the year, though, was when they dealt Nick Schmaltz to the Arizona Coyotes in exchange for Brendan Perlini and Dylan Strome. At the time, Strome was kind of looked upon as a bit of a draft bust because he was drafted so highly, but putting him back with his old junior buddy, Alex DeBrincat, has worked out quite nicely. They found that magic from junior, and he's really been thriving, as I mentioned before, putting up over 50 points in 58 games. They've certainly found themselves, another combination. You've got Kane and Taves, you got DeBrincat and Strome. That top six certainly looks a lot better with Dylan Strome a part of it. That trade right now is looking pretty solid. I mean, Nick Schmaltz is a pretty solid hockey player as well, and I do expect him to do relatively well in Arizona, but that deal worked out exceptionally well for Chicago. Right now, I have to say they're the winners of that deal, considering how well Strome played here down the stretch. Of course, they also acquired Slater Koekkoek from the Tampa Bay Lightning in exchange for Jan Ruda. That deal's a little bit less significant than the other two, but still, I'm okay with that trade as well. And I must say, like I said, Bowman did a pretty good job shaking up the roster throughout the season. Now, I do expect the roster shakeup to continue throughout the year as well. Let's take a look now at some of the contracts they have to look after or choose to look after this summer between their RFAs, UFAs, and what they have for cap space to get all this settled. You can see here on the RFA front, they certainly have some players that are worth keeping around in the organization. Of course, Brendan Perlini, who was acquired, as I just mentioned here early in the year, needs a new deal. I have no doubt he'll be signed. You got Kampf, Forsling, and Koekkoek also on the RFA list. I do think it's quite possible all three of those guys receive qualifying offers and likely remain in the organization. None of them will be expensive to sign, which is good as well. Won't really cut in too much into their cap space. On the UFA front, there's certainly some players that are debatable whether or not they return, and I think it's probably safe to say that just about everybody here. You got Marcus Kruger, who's a pending UFA. Chris Kunitz, the veteran, 39 years old. He will be 40 by the time next season rolls around. He has a September birthday. Of course, you got Cam Ward, who's a UFA as well, coming off a one-year deal. He certainly didn't have some great numbers this year. I don't think he's going to be back. Throughout the year, they did sign goalie Colin Delia to a 3-year extension as well for $1 million per year. I think ideally they'd like to have Crawford and Delia as their goaltending tandem moving forward. A lot of that's going to depend on the health of Crawford, and Delia's contract certainly provides some insurance. So depending on where things are at with Crawford, I think he's only got one more year left on his deal. So longer term, they do need to get the heir apparent to Crawford. I'm not sure Delia's that guy. I guess we'll find out here as he plays a little bit more throughout the next year or so. But they do need to have a plan in place for who's going to be that starting goalie longer term. First defenseman Brandon Davidson as well as a UFA. I doubt he'll return as well. So it's quite possible that they might let all of their UFAs walk and replace them either with prospects or sign other players that are currently outside the organization. Now, if you take a look at their cap situation right now for the upcoming 19-20 season, they currently have 15 players under NHL contracts worth $60.6 million. Salary cap expected to be in the $82 to $83 million range. You're looking at around $22 or so million in cap space. With 15 players under contract, you're looking at signing 7 or 8 players. With that, the only one that's kind of significant within the organization that will get a little chunk would be Brendan Perlini. The rest will certainly be cheaper contracts. They could choose to replace UFAs here, as I said, with possibly some prospects or guys within the organization moving up. That is a possibility, or they could go shopping for some UFAs, which I do think is quite likely to happen here. Of course, a big part of the Chicago Blackhawks offseason too is how they put to use that number 3 overall selection that they were so fortunate to obtain in the draft lottery for the 2019 NHL Draft. They moved up big time during the draft lottery and got the number 3 overall pick, which is going to be big. It's pretty safe to say Jack Hughes and Kaapo Kakko will be off the board, but after that, there's still a ton of great prospects to consider. If you've seen any of my mock drafts here recently, you've seen that I had them selecting Russian forward Vasily Podkolzin. I still think after everything that I've seen that there's still quite a possibility they will take him. I know defenseman Bowen Byram from the Vancouver Giants in the Western Hockey League is certainly looking better and better all the time, working his way up this list too. And I know many think Chicago should take him, but they do have a lot of defensive prospects in the system already. Obviously they have Henry Yokoharu, who have made a lot of appearances early on. You got Adam Boqvist. And of course, you get Nikolai Baudouin as well. The only thing that's uncertain about Podkolzin, though, is when he will come over to play in North America. It looks as though he wants to play in Russia for 1 or more seasons. It's not really clear exactly. Of course, Bowen Byram is a possibility as well. You can never have too many defensemen, but where they do have a lot of prospects already, I wouldn't be surprised to see them go in a different route. Of course, they could even go with another forward, maybe like an Alex Turcotte. It's hard to say if he's worthy of that number 3 spot. But, when you're drafting that high, you have to normally take the best player available. It's not always about need. It just kind of depends on the situation and what's on the board. But it's certainly going to be interesting to see who they select. Of course, I'd love to hear a comment from you, especially if you're a Hawks fan. Who would you like to see them select with that selection? We are going to be putting together another mock draft here now that we had the U18 Worlds completed. Certainly a lot of things have changed with respect to a lot of these players in their rankings. So there will be another mock draft coming out here probably sometime in the next week. So stay tuned for that. But I'd love to hear your feedback on who Chicago should take with that number 3 selection. There are some other veterans within the team that I would highly recommend they look at moving. And I do think it's possible they try, but it's not going to be easy. I think moving either defenseman Brent Seabrook or Duncan Keith would be absolutely huge for this organization. However, the contracts that they come with and no trade clauses certainly make things difficult for sure, especially in the case of Brent Seabrook. And there's also Anisimov as well in the forward group. With the emergence of Dylan Strome, I really think that they could let him go, save the cap space, and put that to better use. So certainly maybe moving Anisimov might be an option as well. But because of contracts and no move clauses, that's going to be difficult to do. But if they can move on from any of those veterans and kind of get some other younger youth into that lineup, that would certainly be a big help and sort out their goaltending. But defense is certainly the area of focus for sure. If they could have played better defensively and cut out a few goals out of their own net, they likely could have been a playoff team, especially with the way they were putting the puck in the net. So of course, as always, I want to hear your thoughts and opinions on the Chicago Blackhawks and how they should proceed here with their 2019 offseason. How should they go about filling this roster? Give me some names of some UFAs you think they should target, or some prospects that you really feel are ready to jump in and take a roster spot next season. If you're new to the channel here, I hope you consider subscribing. We cover all 31 NHL teams, and there's plenty more videos just like this one coming out. As I mentioned, this is video number 4 in a series of 31, so stay tuned for the remainder coming soon. Thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.